안녕하세요, kimincoree 박기미입니다. Hi, this is Kimi Park from kimincoree, and today we are going to talk about this book. This is A Girl from Busan by Okhui Lee. A Girl from Busan is not only a story of personal loss, survival, and her faith, but also about the often overlooked experiences of women during and in the aftermath of World War II. Women are the forgotten victims of war because they don't go to the battlefield and die in action, but they are still deeply impacted and have to face battle of their own. In the first part of the book, Okhui and her female relatives are prime examples of this. Now, the book details some of the jobs that the female relatives of Okhui had to take on in order to survive. Some of them are relatively normal in the sense that it's working in a restaurant or being a secretary or a tutor, etc. But some of them I had never heard about or were more difficult, and so these are the ones that we're going to talk about in this video today. Please note that I'm not judging these women at all. I am approaching this with a compassionate heart and a will to acknowledge their sufferings. As we go through the book's portrayal of these experiences, I want to mention that I'll be discussing sexual violence against women. So if this is something that you'd rather avoid, take care of yourself and feel free to skip to another video. I'll also be spoiling some details from the first part of the book, so consider this a heads up. The first example is that women who worked as taxi dancers or dance partners in dance halls. This was a common practice in the US, and while this profession was slowly disappearing after World War II, it made its way to Korea. From 1949, Ok-sun and Ok-yeon, the two elder sisters of Okhui, worked as taxi dancers in a dance hall in Busan. They would earn a small commission for each ticket they collected from their paying male dance partner who had to purchase ticket. The period after World War II, just before the start of the Korean War, was a decade-long victory celebration for the Americans. Foreign and local businesses associated with Korean nightlife were booming. While big bands gave way to jazz and rock and roll in America, the GIs stationed abroad continued to dance the boogie-woogie and swing with Korean girls. The author doesn't say much more about it, but I can only imagine that while this seems a relatively tame job, it could put these women in precarious situations. The second job, or rather role, that I wanted to mention involves local women becoming girlfriends or wives of American GIs, what is commonly referred as war brides. Indeed, many Korean women saw relationship with American men as a way to survive the economical hardships following the war. These relationships were often transactional, with the women relying on the soldiers for financial stability. This, of course, opened up a whole other layer of complication, power dynamic, and societal judgment. In the book, the author explained that all three sisters would eventually date and marry Americans. My sister was in her late teens and no jobs were available. Dating an American was one of the few ways to support one's family. Korean girls would even move in with their GI boyfriends, which is quite surprising when you know that in Korea, even to this day, it is frowned upon to move in together before marriage. But GI girlfriends and even wives were treated as lower class by the other Koreans. And as one of the author's acquaintances said, being a GI bride wasn't a bad thing. You get to visit the PX and go see the American movies, and you get to eat loads of American popcorn. So the standards for getting married are quite different from what we would expect today. And at some point in the book, both elder sisters of the authors, then in their 20s, followed their GI boyfriends north towards the border of the DMZ and moved in with them. One would even send money back to her family in Busan. And later on in the book, the other sister, then married with an American GI and living with him on base, even encouraged her little sister to get with an American, even if it wasn't for marriage. By the way, she added, if you really need quick cash, I can introduce you to one of my husband's good friend. What for? What do you think? She said, then added with a wry smirk, everybody's doing it. The most disturbing and tragic example is that of women who were forced to become comfort women. Now, many of you might already be aware of the comfort women during the Japanese occupation, but the book also delves into a lesser-known topic, the one of the comfort women during the American Allied occupation. So there is a difference between the two, and let's break this down. This, unfortunately, is widely known. These women, some as young as 12, were forced or tricked into sexual slavery in military brothels for the Japanese. This brutal chapter in history left deep scars on Korea. You might have seen or heard about the memorial statues of the comfort women in Korea and elsewhere in the world. These memorials aim to pay tribute to the estimated 200,000 women who were coerced into sexual slavery by the Japanese. Japan still refuses to recognize the responsibility for this dark history of wartime sexual abuse of women, and this is a source of ongoing conflict between the two countries. Japan argues that these women were not enslaved, but merely working as prostitutes of their own will and making a good living of it. Which, when you hear about the reality of daily life for these women, you just cannot in any way think that this is true. The term comfort women is a translation of Japanese yanfu, which literally means comforting, consoling woman. The justification for needing military brothels was that it supposedly prevented rape crimes in the occupied territories. So in their head, they were considering that what they were doing to these women was not rape, because they were working in these places. So back in the book, and this is truly horrible, but one of the author's Aunt Doki, was actually sold by her very parents to become a comfort woman. So her parents, the author's maternal grandparents, used to be upper middle class but lost all of their fortune due to their addiction to heroin and ended up literally selling their daughter for drugs. So I was quite shocked by this and did a bit of research and found out that in fact there was more Koreans than Japanese that were in charge of recruiting these girls and women to work as comfort women, and they were told that they needed to go and work to support their families, and often they did not quite necessarily understand what was the nature of the work that they would be supposed to do. Of course, the recruiters would get paid money, and the girls were often from very poor backgrounds. So in the book, Aunt Doki worked in a Chinese restaurant that was actually just a facade for prostitution. The author mentions that her aunt actually did get some money from her time there, which eventually allowed her to plan her escape. You'll have to read the book to find out how, and eventually purchase a house in Busan after the end of the war. And after the end of the war, this aunt ended up working as a Kisaeng tea house madam. And I had never heard of Kisaeng, but basically they are fairly similar to what you would know to be Japanese geisha. They have existed since the 10th century in Korea and were most developed during the Joseon dynasty. Back then, Kisaeng were courtesan, providing artistic entertainment such as dance, poetry, and conversation to upper-class men. Then, under the Japanese colonial rule, the role of Kisaeng shifted from being entertainers to being sex workers. From the recollection of the author, who was 7 years old when she briefly lived at her aunt's place, Aunt Doki's Kisaeng house was more of a traditional one, full of colorful hanboks, beautiful dances, traditional Korean music, and women serving tea, alcohol, and food. What is less talked about is the sexual exploitation of women continued during the Allied occupation. Korean women, already broken by war and poverty, were coerced into working in special comfort women unit for South Korean soldiers and comfort stations for American-led UN troops during the Korean War. In the post-war years, many of these women worked in the kijiton or camp towns built around American military bases. In the book, the author remembers how she was hired as what she thought was a tutor role, only to find out when she went to a place of work that it was actually a comfort station for the American soldiers. This part of history is often glossed over, but it's important to acknowledge and remember that the suffering of women did not end with the departure of the Japanese, and that rape, under the justification of payment, was committed not only by the enemy, but also by the allies, and even one's own people. On this very topic, I've been recommended by Dawn, a woman I interviewed, to read a book called Haunting the Korean Diaspora, a research on prostitute by Grace Cho. My friend Dawn, just like the author of this research, is the daughter of an American GI and a Korean woman. I'll put the link of my interview with her in the description below, as well as a list of books that might interest you if you have made it this far in this video. It was immensely sad but also eye-opening to read about these women's hardships. Through Okhui's story, we are reminded that the cost of war goes far beyond the battlefield. If you want to find out what happened to Okhui and her family, I strongly advise you to read A Girl from Busan. It is a raw story but a true story. As it is an autobiography rather than a novel, the writing style is a little bit unpolished, and at the beginning I also struggled to put the characters together, so here's a little family tree I did for myself when I was reading it. Hopefully that'd be useful to you too. But in any case, I find that one always learns something through hearing the story of other people. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video gave you a better understanding of what women in post-war Korea had to endure and why it is important that we keep their stories alive. Let me know your thoughts about Girl in Busan or other related books in the comments, and I see you in my next video. Bye!